Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin, Daf Kaf Hey. Today's daf is sponsored by Jessica Jobanik and Harold Kingsburg in honor of the first birthday of their beloved son, Shmuel Meir. We look forward to many more years learning with you and from you. Be'ezrat Hashem. Okay, we're going to get started with the bottom of our daf. So let's just review a little bit what we were up to. We've been talking about an Eved Kna'ani and how he acquires his freedom after discussing the normal, traditional ways, which was money and a document, right? A get shechur, a document of manumission or emancipation document, however we would call it. Then we discussed that, by the way, not mentioned in the Mishnah, but avadim leave if the master inflicts a wound on the Eved. And today we're going to focus a lot on a mum that is noticeable. It has to be noticeable. What does noticeable mean? We'll get to that soon. So then we discussed yesterday, we ended our daf with a very interesting, even though it was at the end of the daf, we didn't have a lot of time to talk about it, but a very interesting topic about what if you injure the Eved and blind him or knock out a tooth while you're doing a procedure that he asked you to do? He asked you to help him with his eye, and then you knocked out, you ruined his eye. You blinded him. So is that something where you go free? And by the way, the conceptual idea here really is, what was the reason we talked about? What's the reason why the Eved goes free? The real reason is because we don't want you mistreating slaves. Now, in this case, you weren't mistreating him. I mean, you could say maybe the doctor wasn't being careful enough, right? While he was doing the procedure, maybe he didn't care about his slave, but it's not really what we're thinking about. When we think about abuse of a slave, we think more of him beating him, something like that. And to prevent abuse, this halacha was instituted. And perhaps that's the debate, right? Maybe, and it's on the one hand, he wasn't really trying to abuse him, and therefore that's the opinion that says he doesn't go free. That was Rashbag. But the rabbis who say he goes free says it doesn't really matter. In other words, yes, maybe the halacha is instituted. This happens a lot for a reason, whether we know the reason or don't know the reason. But let's assume it's a whole debate why this even happens. But let's assume this is clearly the reason. Assume that. Sometimes it just applies anyway. And that's a little bit of the lashon that they use. You kind of played a trick on his adon and got to go free in this way. And sometimes it doesn't really fit the general rule, but we're going to let it happen anyway, because once you have a rule, he goes free. If you knock at his eye, we're not going to start saying, well, if you knock it out on purpose and this way and that way, blah, 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 and maybe that's the issue. And then we made this distinction at the end between a case where he was actually dealing with the eye, where at least there was intent to deal with the eye and knocked it out, versus if he wasn't even dealing with the eye and knocked out the eye, like, for example, helping birth, have a woman give birth and knocking out the eye of the baby, newborn baby, where there he wasn't even dealing with the eye. That's much more distant. And there, even the one who says you would normally, right, wouldn't say you'd be responsible. He would go free in that case. So anyway, it's a very interesting topic, but we're going to move on from it. We're going to start from 3 lines from the bottom, Amar Rav Sheshet. Another case of an injury to a slave. Does this let him go free or not? Your slave was already blind, and chatita, and then you took out his eye. So now you take out an eye, but the eye wasn't working to begin with. So is that a blemish or not? Does he go free? Eved yotzei bahen lecherut. He actually goes free. My taima mechusar everhu, because now he's missing a part of his body, an important part. Even though it wasn't working previously, it's still considered a mum. How do we know that taking out an eye is considered a mum, in a severe blemish? V'tana tuna, well, there's a braita that supports this. Tamut v'zachut bebehema ve'ein tamut v'zachrut b'ofot. Today we're going to get into a whole bunch of side topics that we always need a little bit of background on. In order to bring a sacrifice, an animal has to be a pure animal, meaning not blemished. Tamim, we call it, complete, not missing something. But that concept of tamut, that's what we say, tamut is not to die, which normally in Hebrew it means tamut. Here we mean tamut from the language of tamim. Okay, an animal that is not blemished, complete, whole. So there's tamut by animals. There's zachrut behemoth. This has nothing to do with our topic. Just happens to be in the source, that animals, to bring a certain offerings, like for example, a burnt offering, it has to be a male animal. But ein tamut v'zachrut ba'ofot. But you can also bring, by the way, a burnt offering. It could be from animals. It could be from birds. If you go into the bird category, number one, there are no blemishes in birds. Okay, all these blemishes we learn by animals don't exist in birds. And this issue that has to be male also doesn't exist. Okay. Well, we said that a bird could be brought blemished. So then, what if its wing is totally dried up and useless, or its leg is torn off, or its eye is taken out? You might have thought maybe you can bring it because we don't care if the bird is blemished. Talmud lomar min ha'of. It says if you bring your sacrifice min ha'of. Now, we've had this many times before in Shas, which is anytime it says from something, it means that there's two different categories of it. From, but not from all birds. You can't bring a sacrifice from all birds. What birds are we going to exclude? Ones whose wings are torn off, whose legs are cut off, or whose eye is taken out. So what do you see here? Even a place where we don't generally consider blemishes, a blemish to be a blemish, still taking out an eye is going to be a blemish and disqualify the bird from being brought. Therefore, also in this case, taking out an eye is a serious matter, even if the slave was blind to begin with. So there, right? Mina of lo kolov. That's the drasha. Amar Rav Chiya bar Ashi Amar Haytalo yeteret v'chatacha. What if he had an extra finger? Okay, once in a while it happens. Somebody's born with 6 fingers. If you take off that 6th finger, okay, is that considered removing a limb? Because it's not a necessary limb, right? But it is a limb of a person. Eved yotzei bahem l'chirut. Yes, you do go free. Amar Rav Huna v'hu shenisperet al gav hayad. This is only, by the way, if the 6th finger was in a row with all the others. Okay, if it grew like as if it looks like a normal hand, just has 6 fingers, then yes. But if it grew and the finger's coming out of somewhere else where it doesn't belong, okay, I'm not exactly clear where it would be coming from, but let's say growing out of the other finger or somehow of the hand somewhere else, then that would not be considered removing a limb of the Eved. Now we're going to start a little bit unpleasant sugya to talk about, but we're going to start with a story, and then we're going to get into some question that perhaps they ask the question, an annoying question, or question that people don't like discussing just to make the rabbi uncomfortable, possibly. Unclear exactly why, but here goes. Sabe de Nizunya lo atu lepirkei de Rav Chisda. So the elders of the city of Nizunya didn't come to Rav Chisda's shir. Amar le Rav Hamnuna zil tzaninu. Okay, imagine you all stopped coming to Daf Yomi. I would get very angry and I would say, you know what? All of you are being excommunicated. Okay. Or so he says to Rav Hamnuna, go excommunicate them, or maybe it's not really excommunication. Tzaninu is really from the language of hide them. What he probably means is just ostracize them or go and say something to them, reprimand them. Okay. Something kind of, this is really not appropriate. Azal amar lehu, my tamalo atu Rabbanan lepirka. So Rav Hamnuna comes and says to them, why didn't you come to shir? By the way, this happens to me. I bump into people and they say, sorry, I haven't been at daf lately, or I haven't been keeping up with the daf. And, I didn't ask that. It's Rav Chisda was the opposite. What do you mean? You didn't come to my shir? You're going to get it. So he says, why don't you come to my shir? He asked Rav Hamnuna. He sends his messenger. So Rav Hamnuna goes and says, why don't you come to his shir? Amrulei, amaynite, why should we come? Debeina mine milta velo pashatlan. Well, we asked him a question and he didn't answer. This, by the way, I'm guilty of also. Sometimes people send me questions. I try very hard to get back to everybody. Once in a while I miss something. So I apologize if I did. Anyway, he said, we asked him a question. He didn't answer us. So why should we go to his shir? Amar lehu, and his reaction is a little bit strange. Have you ever asked me something and I didn't answer you? Which kind of, certainly from their reaction, it seems like maybe he's saying, why don't you ask me the question you asked Rav Chisda, and I'll get back to you. And, you'll see that Rav Chisda has an answer and perhaps didn't answer you because he was busy with something else or for some other reason. Don't hold it against him. Again, it's a question. Why would they hold it against him? Are they saying, if he doesn't know the answer to my question, then we have nothing to learn from him? Or are they saying he ignored me? He's too busy with other things. That's actually why we're angry with him. It's a good question why exactly they're angry. There's a lot of details in the story. We don't really know exactly what's going on. And the commentaries grapple with why exactly did Rav Hamnuna say this. Some people say it's because he was the student of Rav Papa, and therefore if he answers the questions, it's as if Rav Papa answered the question. So say the following. Ba'umine, they ask him the following question. And again, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, if you recall, because I was kind of talking about without having been there, but they're angry with Rav Chisda. And it could be, I don't know if this was the question he asked, and maybe he thought the question was inappropriate, or I don't know what, but you'll see he doesn't really think it's inappropriate because eventually Rav Chisda answers this question, but could be they're asking this question to be annoying, but I don't know. Ba'umine, evet shesir so rabo b'beitzim ma, kumum shebegaloi dami olo. if you castrate an Eved in his testicles, is that considered a noticeable mum or not noticeable? Now, when we thought about a mum shebegalui, normally when we think of galui, we think of things that are noticeable, that are seen by the human eye on a normal way. Now, a man's private parts are not seen by people in general, but because they are seen in the body, we're now going to see that when we mean mum shebegalui, we don't mean a mum that someone can see while you're dressed with clothes on. A mum shebegalui is a part of your body where it's seen, as opposed to an inner part of your body where you can't really see it. It looks the same from the outside, but it's different on the inside. Okay, we'll get to the tongue, for example, okay, which is inside your mouth. On the other hand, the tongue also comes out when you speak. So would you notice it? Wouldn't you notice it? This is what we're talking about, begalui. So they want to know, is this begalui or is it not begalui? Well, lo hava biyate. Rav Hamnuna, after all this, didn't know how to answer the question. Amrulo, mashmach, what's your name? They say to him. Amar lehu, Hamnuna, my name is Hamnuna. Amrule, lav Hamnuna ela Karnuna. You're not Hamnuna, you're Karnuna. What does Karnuna mean? Well, Rashi says, from the Lashon of Yoshev Kranot. Yoshev Kranot is a way of saying you're a lazy bum. Okay, you don't know anything, you don't learn Torah. You can't call yourselves among the Torah learners if you don't know the answer to this bizarre out there question, right? Some people say Nuna is fish, and Hamnuna, often chet and hay interchange. There's Hamnuna and Karnuna. Ham is hot, Kar is cold. And what they're saying is, don't call yourself a hot fish, which is a nice delicacy and a nice word, but you're a cold fish. You're like, whatever it is, it's obviously an insulting term. And they continue, right? They started off angry at Rav Chisda. They continue to be angry at his student, and they're upset. Well, Rav Hamnuna obviously goes and reports to Rav Chisda on what happened. Ata the kamei to Rav Chisda. So he comes before Rav Chisda. He obviously tells him everything that happened. Amar le matnita ba'u minach. He says to him, how could you not know the answer to this question? They were asking you something that appears in a Mishnah. It doesn't really appear in a Mishnah, but it appears as a braita on a Mishnah. We often have it that there's a Mishnah and then there's a braita that relates to that Mishnah and expands on. So here's our Mishnah. We're now getting off topic. I told you we're going to see a lot of different topics today, but you need some background for it. Leprosy. A leprous mark, according to the Torah, is only a leprous mark. First of all, if the Kohen declares it leprous, the Kohen has to see it and declare it leprous. Also, it has to have what's called michya. It has to be a mark that has leprosy in it, but also has healthy skin within it. Okay, where there's leprosy and healthy skin together. So the Kohen has to see that this leprous mark also has healthy spot in it. Well, Ditnan, it says in Masechet Negaim, which is all about leprosy, leprous marks, there's 24 extremities in the body. There's 24 of these evalim, these extremities in the body, that the Kohen can't, in order for it to be a leprous mark, it has to have this michya, this part that's still good, that's healthy, the healthy part of the skin. But the Kohen has to be able to see it. Now, all these places are angled. If they're angled, it means that the Kohen can't see one side and the other. Like, for example, we're talking about fingers. You can't look at my finger and see both sides of my finger at the same time. You're either seeing one side or the other side. So the Kohen can't see these in their entirety, and therefore he can't declare them leprous marks. Okay, so what are they? Rashei etzbaot yadayim v'raglayim, fingers and toes. Rashei oznaim, the ears. Rosh hachotem, the nose. Rosh hagviyah, a man's private area. Rashei, so which is specifically the penis area. We're going to talk about that. We're going to distinguish it from the testicles soon. Rashei dadim shabisha, which I assume mean the nipples of the woman's breasts. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af shabish, also the man's. Okay, because again, because of the angle, you can't see the whole thing. Okay, vitane Allah. Now, it's a question. Maybe you could see the whole thing of all these parts. I don't know exactly how much of it they're referring to in all these cases and what you can't exactly see, but let's just take that as a given. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af shabish, even the nipples of a man. Vitane Allah, and there's a braita on this. Remember, this is the Mishnah, which talked about all these, about leprous marks. Bikulan eved yotzei behem lechirut. All these 24 things are considered extremities that, remember we talked about the Rashei Evarim, that was the whole thing, Shein, Ayin, and Rashei Evarim. So these are all Evarim that if you sever them, Yotzei Bahem L'chirut. Rebbe Omer, af haserus. Rebbe says, also castrating him. We'll get back to this in a minute. Ben Azai Omer, af halashon. Ben Azai says, even the tongue, also, because remember, it has to be bigaloi. So are these things considered bigaloi or not? So Rebbe adds castration. Ben Azai adds the tongue. By the way, I forgot to mention this in class, but last week in flashback, this week's flashback is also on today's daf at the funny end of today's daf. We'll get there soon. But the last week's was about Ben Azai, when Abai said Ben Azai, I'm like Ben Azai in the Shuk of Tiberia. So it's a whole article on Ben Azai. So we're back to him today. So now I'll mention that last week's flashback, you can find it on our site, was all about Ben Azai. So now Ben Azai says even the tongue. Amar. Now let's understand, when he talks about castration, there's two ways you can castrate, either through the testicles or through the penis itself. So Amar, Rebbe Omer, afa serus. What serus is he talking about? Serus demai. Ilem serus digid hainu gvia. Well, that's already mentioned previously in the word gvia. We already translated it as that. And therefore, elalav serus tebesim, it must be serus of the testicles, which means, what do you have here? So if they asked you this question, if serus of the testicles would free the slave, what do we say? Machloket, Rebbe and the rabbis. And there you have an answer. So he basically says to Rav Hamnuna, that was a pretty obvious answer. It's an explicit Mishnah. Now, it's not exactly an explicit Mishnah, but it's an explicit Mishnah with a braita on that explicit Mishnah. So you should have known that. So you could see he was a bit of an angry, person. I don't know. I haven't done research about him in general, but you see in this, he's upset that his students didn't show up and started, going after them. And now he's upset with Rav Hamnuna that he didn't have a good answer to answer them. You could see why he would be upset anyway, Rav Hamnuna, for not answering, because it was his pride on the line, really. And here's his student, and his student didn't know the answer. Okay, that's our topic. But we're going to go off on this topic in a few different ways. So we had the question they asked, we had the answer, and now we see, again, this was helping us in terms of what things would allow a slave to go free. So we have this three-way machloket. Is it just the 24 that we mentioned? Is it also include this castration of the testicles? Does it also include the tongue? Now, it sounds like from the language that Rebbe says, I agree with all your 24. I'll add serus. And Ben Azai says, I'll agree with your 24 and I'll agree with Rebbe about serus, and I add the tongue. Okay, but it sounds like Rebbe doesn't hold the tongue. So Rebbe Omer afa serus, now we're quoting Rebbe, Rebbe lashon lo, he doesn't hold that the tongue would also be considered a part of the body that's revealed. And now we're going to show that he clearly does. Because urimenu, this contradicts somewhere else. Again, another topic we need to understand. Haza'at mechatat. This is when you sprinkle the mechatat waters, the waters of the para aduma waters. You sprinkle them. Now, in order to sprinkle, now, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but when you sprinkle the waters on the person, you don't sprinkle it on their whole body. It's not like their whole body. Let's say I'm impure to the dead. So now you sprinkle water on me. You just have to sprinkle on, again, a part of the body that's revealed. So it's the same criteria. So they say the following, and the haza'ah, the water got to his mouth. Rebbe says this works. The rabbis say this doesn't work. The mouth is considered, right? There's a machloket. Is the mouth considered inside, something that's hidden, or something that's revealed? My love. Now, what do we mean by the mouth? It must mean what part of the mouth is revealed, not the outside part, right? I'm sorry, is machloket, whether it's revealed or not. It wouldn't be the outside part. That would be obvious that it would be considered outside the body. So it must be al lishono. It must mean that you sprinkled the water on the person's tongue. And there's a machloket between Rebbe and the rabbis, and notice where Rebbe falls. Rebbe says it works. So it doesn't make sense that Rebbe wouldn't add the tongue into our case. Lo al sfatav. You say, no, maybe he means on your lips, to which the Gemara says, lips? Al sfatav pshita. It's obvious that lips would be outside your body, so Rebbe wouldn't need to say it, and the rabbis, how could they possibly disagree? They say, well, sometimes people have very thin lips, and they're mostly hidden, and you don't really see them. So maybe a case like that, you might have thought maybe it wouldn't work. Kamash malan, it works. So they say, okay, well, that sounds like a decent answer, although not the best answer, but it really doesn't work because it says in a braita, al lishono. It says specifically in a different braita that hiza, not al piv, but al lishono. And there's a machloket Rebbe and the rabbis. So here you see it's clear that Rebbe holds on the tongue. It's considered external part of your body, which seems to contradict what he says, or definitely contradicts what it says here about the slave. Ve'od Tanya, and then furthermore, there's another braita, shenital rov halashon. Here we're talking about blemishes in animals or in kohanim, to be a blemish kohen. If most of the tongue is cut, then that's a blemish that would disqualify an animal for being sacrificed, a kohen from being able to serve in the temple. Rebbe Omer, about this rov halashon, he explains rov hamidaber shebelashono. Doesn't mean don't take your tongue in its entirety and say it has to be the majority of the tongue. It's the majority of the part of the tongue that comes out when you speak. So the majority of the tip of your tongue, because that's the part that's seen. So again, what do you see here? It's clear that Rebbe thinks the tongue is considered external because you see it, certainly the tip of the tongue. So therefore, it doesn't make any sense. Our Braita, because again, our Braita said he only adds Serus to the list of the 24. And Ben Azai added the tongue. Ela Rebbe Omer Serus. So then they're going to say, oh, we misunderstood the Braita. When he says Serus, he means Serus and the tongue. Castration and the tongue. Ben Azai Omer, and then what would Ben Azai hold? He can't, we thought Ben Azai said not only the 24, also Serus and also the tongue. But now we'd have to say the opposite. Ben Azai says Lashon aval Serus la. He says the tongue, but not castration. So now they say, but the words don't match it. Because remember the order. The rabbis give, right, we have the 24. Rebbe adds Serus, and even Serus, he says. And Ben Azai says, even the tongue. So if even Serus means even Serus and the tongue, then even the tongue should refer back to what Rebbe just said. So my af akamaita. Ben Azai's words are referring back to Tanakama. Even in addition to 24, I would add the tongue. And Rabbi Meir is saying, I add both. Now, the whole order is weird. It should have been the reverse order. It should have been Tanakama, Rabbi Ben Azai, and then Rebbe. So, Ihachi niktem ala Ben Azai bereisha. Then, if you want to say that Ben Azai has 25 and Rebbe has 26, then Ben Azai should be first, even this, and Rebbe should be responding to even this and that. Tana shama le de Rebbe v'kav'a v'shama le de Ben Azai v'tanei u'mishnah lo zaza mim komatza. The answer is, why is that the order, even though it shouldn't be the order? It's because first, what is the Tana? The Tana is the person who repeated this Braita. He learned this Braita. He taught it. So the way he learned it first was he only had two opinions. He had Tanakama and he had Rebbe, who adds two things to the list. So when he said Af Serus, he meant, right, even also the Lashon and also the castration. But Rebbe came first. It's a little bit weird because then it should have said tongue. So that's a weakness in this whole argument. But then what happened? Then he learned about Ben Azai, who said only the tongue is added to the list, only 25 items. So when he then put them all together, he said, listen, Braita were memorized. Now, if I already taught all these people to memorize it like this, Tanakama, Rebbe. If I start putting Ben Azai in the middle there, okay, then I'm going to confuse everybody. If you learn to recite something by heart, and then we switch something, it becomes really complicated to remember it. So I'll give you an example. My mother-in-law, Ala Shalom, used to teach bat mitzvah girls for laning. And she always used to say to them, don't start practicing until you have it right. Because if you practice it wrong, you'll never be able to forget that wrong way. You'll always do it wrong. And I know this when I speak, sometimes there's mistakes that I make all the time that just come out the wrong way, or something. It's something that's ingrained in us, right? It's very hard to change. So therefore, in order to keep, since the Braita were all learned by rote, memorizing, so basically he said, keep it the same, but add it at the end. And that's why it's all out of order. Again, it's a possible way of resolving this contradiction. It's not the most convincing, because the real problem with it, then Rebbe should have said af halashon v'serus and not just af serus. Amar Ula. Now, okay, so what did we do? Let's just review. We started with this question again. Before we had two things about, we talked about pulling out the eye and we reviewed a little the doctor thing. But then we moved on to this question about castration. And from there we got to the tongue, what's considered inside the body, what's considered outside the body. And then now we're going to go off on this topic for other issues as well. We're going to specifically talk about the tongue right now. Amar Ula, hakol modim b'lashon, and don't worry, we'll get back to castration after that briefly, but for now we're on the tongue. Hakol modim b'lashon le'inyan tum'ah. Now we're going to talk about it in different areas of halacha. When it comes to purity and impurity, now we're going to learn it really depends on what the issue is. Does something become impure? How does something become impure, let's say to a sheretz, to a creepy crawly creature that's dead, if it touches it? Now, the tongue can touch anything, right? In fact, you think about babies, right? They're always touching things with their tongues. That's how they explore. So since the tongue can touch, since it can touch a sheretz, not that you want to put your tongue on a creepy crawler dead creature, but since it theoretically could come in contact by touch with a creepy crawler or anything that's impure, therefore it's going to become impure. So if it touches something that's impure, it will become impure. My time, Asher Yigabo Amar Rachmana, because the Torah says what touches it will become impure. And this can touch. Li'inyan tefillah, but what about going in a mikvah? You ever think about this? When you go in a mikvah, do you have to open your mouth and have the water go inside your mouth? No. So li'inyan tefillah ketamundami. It's considered for tefillah purposes hidden. My time, the Torah says you have to rinse your body in water, right? Or wash your body in water. Ma bisaro, your flesh. Okay, the word is flesh. Bisar. Flesh is me'abarai, is outside your body. You don't have flesh inside your body. Af kol me'abarai. So only parts that are external. Therefore, your mouth doesn't need to go in the mikvah. Lo nechleku ela linyan hazah. Well, now we have a machloket about the sprinkling. Okay, this goes back to what we were discussing before, this machloket about the sprinkling and the tongue. Is it part of it or is it not? Does it work for hazah or does it not? Rebbe, who says it works, medame leila tum'ah, says, oh, look, hazah should be compared to impurity. Because why? What's hazah? It's getting you out of impurity. So it's in the realm of purity and impurity. So therefore, let's treat it like impurity, just like impurity could make you impure. When you get out of the impurity, you can use the tongue. The rabbi said, what do you mean? What does tefillah do? It purifies you. What does haza'ah do? It purifies you, right? Sprinkling the paraduma waters, the red heifer waters. So it's the same thing as tefillah. We should learn it from tefillah. If it doesn't work for tefillah, meaning you don't need to, your tongue is considered internal when it comes to tefillah, it should be considered internal for haza'ah, meaning it doesn't work. So now they're going to say, travayu b'hai krak hamiflageh. They actually argue about how to understand the same pasuk. The pasuk about sprinkling the waters reads the following: V'hizah tahor latameh. I'm going to read you the whole pasuk first. V'hizah tahor latameh. So the pure person who's dealing with paraduma water sprinkles on the impure person. Notice the word tameh is in the pasuk. This is going to be critical. B'yom hashlishi u'b'yom hashvi'i, on the third day and on the seventh day of the week after they become impure to a dead body, they sprinkle them on those 2 days. V'chit'o b'yom hashvi'i, and then chit'o is the key word. Chit'o means we sprinkle the waters on him and purify him. It's called the mechata. So the verb is chit'o. The chibes b'gadav rachatz b'mayim v'teher ba'erev. And then he washes his clothes, and then he goes into the mikvah, and he becomes pure in the evening. So how are they going to each start in this pasuk? Rebbe who says we're going to learn it from Tuma, says very simply, V'hizah tahor al hatameh b'yom hashlishi b'yom hashvi'i v'chit'o. The word v'chit'o connects with tameh. So there you have it. Tameh goes with chit'o, and therefore it's going to be learned from Tuma. What do you mean? Don't learn it connected to the beginning of the pasuk. Chit'o is smack in the middle of that pasuk. Connect it with the end of the pasuk, which says rachatz b'saro. You go to the mikvah. So we're going to learn it from mikvah. So which they ask, Rebbe nami didamle the tumah. Why doesn't Rebbe learn it from impurity? Very obvious reason. We're talking about chit'o is becoming pure, and tefillah is about becoming impure. So we're going to learn how to get out of impurity from how to get out of impurity, and not the way you got into impurity. The Rebbe nidamle le tefillah. So Rebbe really should compare it to tefillah. It's much more logical. He says, but there's another verb in between v'chit'o and v'rachatz. There's v'chibes b'gadav. Okay? So since there's something break there, obviously you can't connect. Well, obviously according to him, you can't connect chit'o to rachatz because there's another verb in between that, which is wash your clothes, which is something else entirely, and that splits that part of the pasuk from the other part, and that's why he goes backwards to what appeared just before, which is about the tameh. The Sava Rebbe, okay, so that was an aside. We got to Tuma right? We're going to distinguish between impurity and between tefillah, right? There's different laws for each one that everyone agrees about. The question is, what about sprinkling as paraduma waters? Where does the tongue come out in that case? Can we learn from that one or that one? Now we have another question on Rebbe. V'sava Rebbe linyan tefillah ketamun dami. Now wait, we thought it was obvious that Rebbe and the rabbis, everybody thinks that when it comes to tefillah, you don't have to get your tongue wet, right? It's considered an internal part of your body. To which the Gemara asks, wait a minute. V'hama Ravin, Amar Rav Ada, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Didn't Ravin say in the name of Rav Ada in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak? Ma'aseh b'shivcha shel beit Rebbe. There was a maidservant in the house of Rebbe, Shetavla, that went to the mikveh. Ve'alta v'nimtza etzem ben shinah. She got out of the mikveh and she realized she had a bone stuck in her teeth. And what happened? He said, you have to go to the mikveh again. Now, why? And you all know this. If you go to the mikveh, one of the things you do is you floss your teeth and you brush your teeth, even though you don't open your mouth in the mikveh, but you do that. So now it becomes very strange. If this is, if the laws of chatzitza, which is there can't be a separation between your body and the water. Now, your body, we just said, means the outside part of your body. So why on earth would he make, especially he made her go again? Sometimes we say, b'di'evid, maybe ideally you should take out, but if you didn't, well, it's okay. He didn't even do that. He said, you have to go back to the mikveh again, even though the water didn't get in her mouth. So, or maybe the water should have gotten in her mouth. What's going on? Nehid be a maim lo be'ina, and here's a very famous halacha. It comes up a lot of times in Shas. It might not need water to get in there, but makom hara'oi lavo b'mayim be'ina. But you need the inner part of your body to be open to accepting the water, meaning there can't be any separation that potentially, if you were to open your mouth, the water could get everywhere. You don't actually need to open your mouth and have the water get everywhere. What's the most important relevance of this for mikvah, or the most common, I would say? Someone who can't go to the mikvah because either they have an ear infection, they can't get their ears wet, or for whatever reason, maybe they never can get their ears wet. So what do? They put cotton balls in there. You can't put something in that completely seals the area because of this halacha. You can do a cotton ball because even though for the second you're going to dunk, no water is going to get into your ears. But since potentially, if you stayed down there long enough, water could get in your ears, that's good enough. And that's this halacha. And we're going to see where we learn it from. It's very famous. So, makoma ra'oi lavo b'mayim be'ina, you need a place where the water can get to. Kid Rabbi Zera, as Rabbi Zera says, to Amar Rabbi Zera, as Rabbi Zera said, kol ha'ra'oi lebila ein bila ma'akevet bo. What are we talking about here? Something we say in our prayers all the time, on the holidays especially. When you talk about musaf, where you bring the korbanot, it's always balul b'shemen. You need the solet, the flour, the fine flour. This is the meal offering, mixed with, and it's mixed up with oil. Now, there's no verb that says you have to mix it, but it says that it has to be mixed. So that means you have to mix it, right? Well, not exactly. What they learned here is as long as it can be mixed, it's fine. So if you didn't mix it, it's okay. You could still bring the mincha offering. So if you have this chunk of, some chunks of flour and some oil, and they're not really mixed up, you could still bring your mincha offering. But it has to be ra'oi lebila. So what does that mean? What it means is, and Tosfot quotes this famous Mishnah in Menachot, we'll get there, we have a while, Harei alai mincha, in the middle of that, the fourth line, that third line of the Tosfot, Harei alai mincha shel 61 isaron. Now, a normal vessel that they would mix the mincha offering in could hold 60 tenths of an ephah. That's the amount of solet it could hold. It really could hold 40, but with the overflow, you could get to 60. And it can be mixed at 60. Anything over 60, if you try to mix it, it will start falling out. So if you say, I'm bringing a mincha offering of 61 esronim, you put 60 of them in the first bowl, and you put one in the second bowl. Because even though it doesn't need to be mixed, it has to be potentially able to be mixed. And if you can't potentially mix it because everything will fall out of the bowl, then it doesn't work. That's the halacha that he's talking about. So, okay, so if you didn't mix it and you put 61 esronim in the bowl, you can't bring your mincha offering because you couldn't have potentially mixed that without some of it falling out. Okay, and that's how we got to our halacha that explains Rebbe. Even though you don't have to open your mouth in the mikveh, there has to be potential that if you were to open your mouth, the water would get everywhere and there wouldn't be a separation. That's necessary. Now, so what did we do? Again, let's just go back. We started with this question of these rabbis or these elders, I don't know if they were rabbis, they were elders who asked about castration. From there, we quoted this Mishnah in Negayim with a Braita on the Mishnah, where added that Rebbe added castration of the testicles, and Ben Azai added the tongue. Then we said it must be Rebbe adds the tongue also because of other things he says. And then we basically bring up this other machloket he has about the tongue when it comes to sprinkling the para aduma waters. And then from there we said, what about tefillah? How could he not require the tongue? Doesn't he require that there be no chatzitza? And then we distinguished that it doesn't mean you need actually your tongue though to get wet. So now we're going to go back to the testicle issue and finish up that issue before we get to the next Mishnah. Kitanai, this machloket about whether castration will free the slave or not, which Rebbe says it does, and Tanakama didn't list that, right? They didn't think so. Kitanai, and also Ben Azai didn't think so. It's a machloket Tanaim. And now again, we're comparing it to a different topic, which is really the same kind of topic, which is what is considered a blemish in an animal. And from there, we can say it's the same machloket about, is this considered a blemish in your slave? Because if it's considered a blemish, it's a blemish. And then it would be a blemish that the slave goes free, because again, it's all the same criteria. It has to be blemish in both cases, both in animals, can they be brought as sacrifices? Or avadim, did you do something serious to injure him? Is all about, is it something noticeable? So what they're going to say about these testicles is going to be the same machloket in both places. Ma'uch b'chatut v'natut b'karut, that's a list of these blemishes in the Torah of animals. Kulam b'beitzim divrei Rabbi Meir. All of these are in the testicles, to which the Gemara stops the Braita and says, wait a minute, b'beitzim v'lo b'gid? Wait, it's more likely that in the gid, in the man's private parts, that's really in the penis, that's where you're going to actually have a problem. That's much more noticeable than in the testicles, which is more hidden. So he said, no. Ela kulam af bebeitzim. He says, in addition, right? It's saying it doesn't mean only in the beitzim, but he says all four of those includes all those issues. By the way, let's just talk about them. Ma'uch b'katut, right? That's crushed and smushed or something like that, to kind of like a crushing of them. And natuk v'karut is cut off in two different ways, okay? Where the inside vessels are cut. So now they say all of those are a problem, even in the testicles. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that matches Rabbi, who says that seirus, right, in the testicles, which would be cutting something inside, would be a problem for the slaves. Same idea. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer kulam begid. Rabbi Yossi omer, okay, so he says they're all only in the gid, not in the testicles. Rabbi Yossi says ma'uch v'chatut af bebeitzim, natuk v'karut begitim im bebeitzim lo. That is a logical split, which is the crushed ones, which will be noticeable on the outside, will be applicable to the testicles. But the ones that are not, the ones that are internal, that won't be applicable for the testicles. That wouldn't make the animal blemish. So we have three opinions here. Before we really only saw two. Either it is or it's not. But here we see that there's three different opinions about what's what there. Okay, done with that topic. We're now moving on to the next Mishnah. We now finished the Eved Knani, which again, I already reviewed the beginning of the stuff, but we did Kesef, how do we know? Shtar, how do we know? And then we added this issue if he goes free when you blemish him, and that's how we got into all these assumptions about what kind of blemishes. And again, we talked about yesterday without really getting into it. It had to be galui, that was shein and ayin, are things that are seen, had to be something seen. Today we learned seen doesn't mean seen in a normal way when you're walking around on the street. Seen could even be in a hidden part of your body generally, but it's not hidden in your body. Whereas if it's hidden inside your body, right? And then the question is the tongue, and things like that, which come in and out, what would that be considered? And the castration of the testicles. Okay, moving on to another topic. Behema gasa and behema daka. How do you acquire animals? Okay, so now before we start, we're going to talk about three different ways of acquiring. One is lifting. Lifting is obviously the best way to acquire something because you're showing ownership by lifting. What do we mean by acquiring? It means that once this act is done, you can't change your mind. Okay, in halacha, many times, if you can't, these things aren't acquired with money. You could have paid the money, but if you didn't lift the object, it's not yours, and then you can renege on the deal. Both sides can actually renege. Okay, but once, right, nowadays, it's usually the money's paid, that's the deal is signed. Very hard to get your money back. But, I mean, obviously there's laws of exchanging and things like that, but it's very hard to get your money back. But in those days, it was more done by lifting, pulling, passing. Okay, those are the ones we're going to discuss. Mashicha is pulling. Mesira is passing. So behema gasa, a large animal, nikne b'mesira. You basically take the reins, let's say, and pass them over to the person. That's how you're going to acquire a large animal. Hadaka bahagbaha. Small animals, you lift them. Okay, a sheep, lift it up. Okay, it's not a big deal to lift. Obviously, it's hard to lift a big animal, and that's why they don't require hagbaha. I say obviously, but wait till later in the daf. That's different Rabbi Meir for Rabbi Eliezer. But Chachamim omrim behema daka nikne behema daka nikne b'mishicha. The rabbis say that behema daka is acquired by pulling. Okay, now we have a big argument between Rashi and the Ri, and maybe you can think about this. We don't have time to really discuss it. It's a very interesting topic. When we say mesira here in the first line, behema daka nikne b'misira, is what's stronger? Passing you the reins or you pulling it? Okay, it's a big debate. First of all, pulling can only be done it can't be done in your domain. Okay, because if I pull in your domain, that doesn't really mean anything. I'm in your house. So pulling would have to happen or in public, like in the Reshut HaRabim. It would have to happen, we'll see later, in a simta, like a side area in Reshut HaRabim, which sort of doesn't belong to anybody, or in my own house. Okay, pulling would have to be when it's in my domain, not when it's in your domain. The question is pulling stronger than passing, or is passing stronger than pulling? So there's two ways to read this. Some people say the be'ema gasa nikne b'misira, and all the more so mishicha. Obviously mishicha and also mesira. Rashi doesn't view it that way. Rashi says mesira is atypical. Okay, he says because an animal doesn't generally walk. Okay, meshicha is atypical because an animal doesn't normally, you don't pull it like that. Okay, it usually goes the other way where it walks and you're behind it or something like that. Rashi thinks it's atypical manner for an animal. The Ri, who proves that it's actually better, proves it from a case of a boat. So Rashi will distinguish between a boat and an animal. But he says it's clear Mashiach is stronger because it says there's a machloket about a boat. And one opinion says even Mesira, but obviously, right? I'm sorry, one says lo kana ad shiyim shechena. You have to do Mashiach, Mesira is not enough. So that shows Mashiach is more than Mesira. So there's a debate about which is more, and that's just in terms of food for thought, like what do these actions mean and which is stronger? It's debatable. Everyone agrees that Hagbaha is stronger. So now let's just go back to this first line. Be'ema gasa is acquired by passing over reins or something like that. Darish Rab b'Kimchunya, in the place called Kimchunya, Rab said, Be'ema gasa nikne b'mishicha. It's by pulling. Now, depending on how you understand, right? Some people say it's by pulling also, right? That was Tosfot who says Mashiach obviously is included, but it sounds, so according to Tosfot, this would be only by Mashiach, not Mesira, which goes against the Mishnah. According to Rashi, the Mishnah is only Mesira, and he's saying Mashiach instead of Mesira. So anyway, either which way, this somehow goes against our Mishnah, depending on how you understood our Mishnah. But Shmuel finds the students of Rav Amar Lahu, he says to them, how could Rav have said that? Hanan b'Mesira. It says in our Mishnah Mesira, not Mashicha, passing over, not pulling. Rav Nami b'Mesira Amar. Rav also said b'Mesira. Hadar b'Amei. Do you think? And as I know, Rav said it somewhere else. What did he change his mind about it? So hu amal ki haitana. So they say, yeah, he actually changed his mind. Ignore what he said when he said it's b'Mesira. And don't worry about our Mishnah because Rav holds by a different Tana. Tanya, v'chachamim omrim zo v'zo nikne b'mishicha. The rabbis say both large and small animals are acquired by Mashiach. So there you have your answer. But the Braita continues with another opinion that's going to be a very strange one. Rabbi Shimon Omer zo v'zo b'hagbaha. Both are acquired by lifting, large animals and small animals. Now this is weird. Small animals I get. Large animals, how are you going to lift them? To which Matkivla Rav Yosef questions Rabbi Shimon and says, Elameata, here comes the funny line of today's daf, Pil Rabbi Shimon b'mei yikneh. How on earth are you going to acquire an elephant? Who could lift an elephant? There's no way to do that. Okay, so you have to read Shuli Mishnah's article. It's really great about elephants in the Gemara. Did they know what elephants were, right? Probably not, even though they do talk about elephants, and it's clear, and she shows from photos, like pictures, not photos, from pictures drawn in those times, how often they looked very weird, not like elephants that we know today, because they probably just had legends about what elephants look like, but they didn't really know about elephants. In any case, this is our sugya. So he asked, and obviously it would be the same for a cow or a bull or something like that. How on earth are you going to do that? So anyway, they asked this great question. What are you going to do about a peel? Obviously, an elephant is bigger than all those other animals, and therefore it's a good question to ask. So Amarle Abaye bechalipin. Abaye says, okay, with a peel, if you can't lift it, yes, ideally you should lift it. If not, you do chalipin, which is the symbolic act where they lift, right? Something as symbolic that we're doing a kinyan. To which they say, or inami, second option, bisocheret mekomo. You rent the space where the animal is, and then with that, you acquire the peel. It's called the kinyan chatzer. You get what's in the chatzer along with what you're acquiring. Rabbi Zera Amar, mevi arba'a kelim u'menichan tachat raglav. So now they say you bring 4 vessels that are yours. You put the 4 feet of the elephant in your vessels, and then you basically end up having the elephant inside your vessels. And there you've acquired the elephant. Because if you go into a store and you put things in your vessel, that becomes yours. Well, there's actually a debate about it, and that's what the Gemara is going to ask right now. Shema mina, you're going to learn from here. Kelav shelokech b'reshut mocher kana lokech. There's a whole debate. We've seen this before. If I bring my vessels into your store and I put spices, let's say, in my vessels, are they mine at that point? Have I acquired them? Or do I actually have to bring them into my own house or some sort of domain that's mine? So from here, it would sound like if you just put the vessels under, from what Rabbi Zera says, under the elephant, sounds like even in your domain, it would work for me to acquire it. So they say, no. You could say that this is referring to a simta, okay, which is a corner of the private public domain where it will work. Okay, that's not in your domain. Or you could give a totally different answer. And there's going to be a few. This is another funny kind of thing about this sugya. Inami bechaviles morot. Or you could put these vines, like fruits from the vine, where basically you're going to take these piles of I'm not sure, maybe someone can help me with the exact translation of this, but Rashi says, what are you going to do? How's that going to help? Well, you're going to put them on the ground, and the elephant is going to step on them, and that's going to be, you cause the elephant to lift his feet up, and that already makes it yours. This goes with, right, and lift it 3 tvachim off the ground, and that makes it yours. Why? It's like by sukkah, right? Anything 3 tvachim off the ground is going to be considered as it basically lifts itself up. So you're going to take these bundles of vines, thanks for the translation, take these bundles of vines, and with that, the elephant will lift himself up. What's the issue with this? Well, Tosfot says, why did it use vines then? It doesn't make any sense, but bundles of vines, put a stone, right? And the elephant will pick up his leg, and that will be considered as if you lifted it, right? Because you caused it to lift. Just like by Mashiach, by the way, we talked about you could cause it to move. Remember, we compared that to the Eved where it wouldn't work, but you could cause the animal to move by pulling him. So now Tosfot says something very interesting, and this also Shuli picked up on in her article. He says, therefore, it must be Mefarish Rabbeinu Meshulam that he took these bundles of vines because elephants eat them, and he put them up high, and that caused the elephant, you ready for this, to jump up and reach them, and that caused the animal to be lifted. So the obvious question is, right, elephants don't jump, so what are we talking about, right? Again, how much do they really know about elephants? Interesting, but it didn't preclude them from trying to have conversations about it. So with that, we will end our daf. Again, discussion about how animals were acquired. We talked about a machloket, whether Masira or Mashicha, which is stronger. That's an outside the Gemara machloket. And then we got back to Rav says b'Mashicha and not b'Masira. That goes against the Mishnah. Oh, it must be, right, big animals. It must be he holds by this opinion in the Braita. And then we quoted Rabbi Shimon in the Braita, who basically talked about they all have to be lifted, even big animals, to which the Gemara said, well, then how are you going to acquire an elephant? And then we found a different way to do it that would work. Okay, with that, end of today's daf. Wishing everybody a great day, and think about elephants today. By the way, I should just add as an aside that when I was in the Far East, so I learned that acquiring elephants is not just complicated in terms of halachically how to acquire it, but it's not so much the acquiring the elephant that's the expensive part, it's the feeding the elephant. Apparently it costs $5,000 worth of food a month to feed an elephant. So if you ever want to buy an elephant, you should know it's not just an issue of how you're going to acquire it, it's also how you're going to afford to feed it. Have a great day.